PLA curriculum. And what I want to show you today will not only benefit your planning for questions, but it will allow you, one, to hit the benchmark expectation, but also allow for activities that allow for that rigor or that grade level rigor that we sometimes often are unsure if we're really hitting, okay? So that's our goal today. It was a common, and I don't think it's like a mishap or anything, but one common thing across our school district is the lack of rigor. And sometimes that is the case when we have new standards. Our district, since I have been teaching, has received 3 or 4 different sets of standards, and it's a learning curve. Because one, if it's our first time teaching the grade level, everything's new. But if you've been teaching for 20 years and then you are given new benchmarks to follow, okay, there's some common language, but a lot of it is still new. So with that said, when it comes to rigor and when it comes to our new benchmarks, I want to leave you with a takeaway today that will allow you to see a benchmark and properly plan for it to ensure there's rigor and so forth. Okay? All right. So first things first, we're just going to start with a little bit of a discussion. And you might not have much to say, especially if you are new to teaching, and that's okay. But really, we'll just go around the room and talk about this. But what are you doing to ensure the level of rigor meets the benchmark expectation you are teaching? Just take a moment to think about it. If you come up with something, you're welcome to share. Any ideas?
I think a lot of it is taking it to what the benchmark is asking, because a lot of times it's easy to sort of stop before it, but when it says explain or elaborate, making sure to give the students the opportunities to do those types of things through writing or any other means as well.
I love that. So really what I'm hearing is you are giving students the opportunity to meet the tasks that are involved within that benchmark. And like you were saying, if a benchmark asks a student to do multiple things, like identify and explain, that's what we should be hearing and planning for, because we can't just ask a student to identify the central idea. That's not hitting the benchmark entirely. We're not meeting the benchmark expectation. But like you said, considering the task that is involved, we need them to identify and explain. I love it. So just considering that opportunity. Anybody else?
I started to put a box around those words.
Yes.
So that way the kids and I know to come back okay, that's the action word.
Absolutely, and just having that visual. So using your Common Board, making a box around those words, it's just that constant reminder. You know, as a teacher, I feel like sometimes if the text is new and I've never done it before, if the benchmark is new and I've never done it before, I find myself worried at the end of a lesson, like, oh my gosh, should I ask the right questions? You know, did I assess them correctly? And really, it's hard to tell unless you have feedback from someone who is watching you. But having that easy way of looking up on your board and seeing that you have the word explain, circled or squared, and identify, it's like that reminder of what you need to ask so you can ensure that you are truly hitting that benchmark expectation. Does anybody else want to share on how they are making sure that rigor is taking place? No? Okay. So, there is a huge takeaway that I'm going to share with you today. I've been sharing this with grades 3, 4, and 5 at multiple schools, and I hope that you start using this from here on out when it comes to planning your questions for the text set and also planning for activities. So, in your current IG, we have a knows and do's section. So before you look at your laptop, does anyone know which stage that is located underneath? All right.
Stage 1.
Yes, stage 1. Okay. Stage 1. Okay, stage 1. So the knows and do's section is actually the most overlooked component of the IG. Now, I know that these IGs are like 28 pages in length, and they are overwhelming. They are not meant to work through entirely, but they are there for guidance purposes, okay? So if you are a veteran teacher or a new teacher, you might find different parts of this IG useful, beneficial, or maybe nothing at all, okay? But the one thing that I can say that is the best thing to refer to when looking at IGs and using them for planning is that stage 1 section where you have your no's and do's. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up your current IG, and we're going to look at this section together and how you are going to use it during your planning. So let's go right down here. All right. And if it's hard to see, absolutely look at your laptop so it's a visual for you up close. I know my vision is horrible, so I need it big and bold. Okay, so first and foremost, when it comes to the students will be able to do, this is the task required of the benchmark. We had one of our state representatives work with us to write these no's and do's, and these are the experts. These are the ones who work every day and night for 24 hours with our new best standards. So with that said, when we work through the different tasks that students need to do for the benchmark, we made sure and they made sure that we hit that benchmark entirely and just not parts of it. So with that said, is there any particular benchmark you want to focus this conversation on? Because I'm not going to reference all three.
The character's perspective.
Okay.
That's the hardest one.
It is. It absolutely is. And you know what? This is just a big aha moment. So think about this. Third grade kiddos, luckily they had that exposure to our best standards last year because K through 2 kiddos were the first ones to start hearing this benchmark language, okay? So it's really beneficial for you guys because you have kiddos coming in who have already heard the word perspective or a word very similar to perspective in that vertical progression. But the kiddos who are currently sitting in 4th and 5th grade, they have not heard most of this academic vocabulary. So really, 4th and 5th grade teachers really have a lot of planning and scaffolding to get them to where they need to be. So we will focus on our 1.1 and let's go back up to stage 1 where we have the definition of this particular benchmark, and I'm going to highlight this for now. And it says here, explain different characters' perspectives in a literary text. Now, explain is bold, and maybe I should unhighlight so you can see that a little bit better. Explain is bold, and it's bold because this is the first time students are going to be asked to explain something. And earlier, before we started this meeting, Corey and I were talking about what explain actually looks like in the classroom. You are having students to tell you in detail what something is about, okay? It's not just answering a question, but it's elaborating with that detail component, okay? So that can be done orally, that can be done in written form, or that can even look like a multiple choice question, okay? So when they are asked to explain, that's a bold word, that a task that they've never been asked to do for this particular benchmark. Also, the benchmark clarification. It says here the term perspective is a particular attitude toward or a way of regarding something. Perspective is different than point of view. Point of view is a term that is going to come up later. We won't focus on that now. But in later years in 4th and 5th grade, students have to compare author's point of view to character perspective, and it's a very, very challenging task. So as a 3rd grade teacher, the most important thing you can do with this particular benchmark in planning is to make sure, one, that they are aware that characters, if there's multiple characters in a story, they can have different perspectives, okay? And then you use that text, the events, to really explain the difference in character perspectives. So going back down to the no's and do's and how they will help you with planning, you are going to always refer to the bulleted points for that benchmark under the do's section when you are planning questions and activities, okay? And when I say questioning and activities, I say that because sometimes when you have your admin walking through your classrooms, they only see a piece of your lesson, okay? And I know that principals in our classrooms really looking for teachers truly teaching that benchmark expectation. So if students aren't hearing it in the questioning, or your principals aren't hearing it in that questioning opportunity, it's important that they see it in the activity, okay? So with that said, there are 2 tasks that will allow you to meet the benchmark requirement or that benchmark expectation. The first thing, it says explain a character's perspective for 2 or more characters. Yes, it says characters in the benchmark, but it must be 2 or more. It doesn't have to be just 2. It can be more than 2 characters. And they have to explain, okay, the perspective of different characters, okay? Are you guys reading, which text are you guys reading now?
There's shared one.
Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, so what I would do with that particular text is start identifying the different characters in the story and how they feel about particular things that are going on in that particular story, okay?
So can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Because I worked on it with my kids yesterday, and it's from the point of view of this little boy. So you don't really see a second character. That's the only thing that doesn't hit that benchmark.
Okay, but what does the grandmother, how does she feel about it? Is she bringing that tradition, or what is it? Because we remember, if he's talking about her, she's got to have some sort of, whether it's implied or not implied, but she's got to have some sort of perspective when it comes to doing that with her grandson.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Okay,
So,
that makes sense.
and here's where it gets a little bit challenging. So, for me, and this is just
So the author is also a character?
no, not necessarily. So the little boy telling the story, he's one character.
But he's the author.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So in this case, yes, but it's not always the case. So the little boy who is narrating the story, his perspective will be more obvious. But when the little boy starts talking about making the empanadas with his grandmother, think about the things that take place when they are making it and how the grandmother could feel or would feel about that.
Okay.
And then-
Inference.
Yes, and
Okay.
they have to inference. But that is another benchmark that was, introduced in earlier years that will naturally allow a student to identify perspective, even though it's not stated. You know what I'm saying? And that's why we stack our benchmarks. But we can't assume that students are going to be able to do it, okay? And so with that said, if we know this particular benchmark is having students identify and explain multiple character perspectives, we've got a scaffold to get them there. Okay, even though it's not telling us, the little boy is not telling us how grandma feels, how would you feel if you got to sit with your grandma and make empanadas? How do you think your grandma would feel about it? Okay, it's really digging deeper into a story, and that's why I feel like sometimes we get lost in just teaching the text because we need to teach the benchmark, and we lose that love for reading, okay? And we aren't putting a lot of thought into it, and we don't want it to look like that. We want to take those read days, and I know I'm going a little off topic, but in the routine, when you are reading to these children or reading with them, take those opportunities, just read to or read with, and build that background knowledge. Do those think alouds. You don't have to necessarily start teaching the benchmark right away. Wait until those reread days, okay? So really taking that opportunity to kind of build that background knowledge so they start thinking about, oh, this is how grandma feels. Now I can apply that to character perspective. Does that make a little bit more sense?
Yeah, I was just confused because like the author would be the character also as well as the grandma in the poem.
In this particular one, yes.
The
Yes.
speaker, not
The
necessarily
speaker.
the author. The way
Yeah,
I
exactly.
wrote it
Yeah.
is writing it from that perspective, so that's the narrator.
Exactly, because narrator is not going to be the same as speaker. It all depends on the type of genre, if it's a poem, a fiction, so, and I don't have my TE here. We could pull it out and absolutely look at this, especially after we work through the dues, just so that clarification is there. But yeah, but see also, just one aha I'm thinking about as we talk through this, in our clarifications in the IG or even in the TE, there will be certain things called out as far as the speaker of the text and who that is. It's like opportunities to build that background knowledge and prep for this particular piece of text.
Yeah, yesterday, in Dawn's room, when we were reading through it, the first read was, who is the narrator? And that was all we touched upon.
Yes,
Right.
good,
And-
good.
Yeah,
Good.
so that when they reread, now they can talk about the feelings.
Absolutely, absolutely,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
why, when we have those reads built into our routine, and this is, I love these conversations, because it's a learning curve for all, but those read days, okay, you get 2 for the shared, 2 for the anchor, build that background knowledge, especially if you have struggling readers. I never say to a teacher, oh, they have to read. No, read to them, okay? Read to them, whether you just want to do it with books shut or them tracking words, read to them, build that background knowledge so that you have set them up for success when you do rereads and hit those benchmarks, okay?
Yeah, and they were using the pictures.
Yes,
Yeah.
good,
I mean,
yes.
I was actually shocked because I was like, well, how do you know? And they're like, right there in the green shirt. But they were like, I don't know if it's a boy or
Yes.
girl. I'm like, at least you're using it.
Absolutely,
You know,
and,
so-
and you know what, and that's where we can tie in other benchmarks and making those connections and allowing them to really truly show us that yes, what you learned in 2nd grade is carrying into 3rd grade, and look how it's helping you. Okay, those text features, those illustrations. So back to the students will do. So they have to be able to explain the different characters' perspectives, but they also need to use details from the passage to explain them. So we do need them to go back into the text and be able to justify why that is that character perspective for that character. So they can't just explain it. They have to prove it to you by using the text, whether they are communicating it with you saying, oh, in the text it said, or if it's a multiple choice, which they will see on the exemplar, it might say, which detail from the text best supports this character's perspective, okay? So if you are planning questions that involve both of these tasks, but also providing an activity that asks for students to do both of those tasks or bulleted points, then you are providing that rigor and you are meeting the benchmark expectation. Okay? The no's and do's section is the most valuable part of the IG. Okay? Especially because these benchmarks are new. I know when I started teaching different grade levels, it was tough to learn my standards at the time. It was tough for me to really reflect on, was I asking the right questions? Did I truly teach it the right way? I didn't know, okay? But with these no's and do's, we can ensure it's happening, okay? So I hope that this little planning piece will allow you to further plan in a way where you feel more comfortable with teaching the benchmark and meeting that benchmark expectation, but also knowing that you've provided the rigor that is necessary in grade 3. Okay? Any questions? No?
Lauren,
Yeah.
so when we're planning, I mean, obviously we're using the text.
Yes.
And we're using the other anthology book.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we want to create an activity for a small group
Yes.
that our students can do independently,
Mm-hmm.
how can we do that to make sure we're meeting the benchmark, meeting the rigor, and they can do it independently?
So that's a great question. Now, and I'm going to speak for struggling readers and not struggling readers on this one, if that's okay. So sometimes with our struggling readers, the teacher will, and this is small groups, so remember that differentiation component is there and it can be there. But if you are planning for small group differentiation with struggling readers, what I would recommend is first start with the actual text that you are using. So in this case, you would use Empanada Day. And what I would have you do is find a page or a chunk of text, because we don't want them to reread the whole thing, but find a chunk of text that really allows them to at least identify one character's perspective. Okay, because remember, in small group, we can differentiate, we can scaffold, and then start there with one character's perspective. And then maybe the next day, let's look at another chunk of text, because we don't want to overwhelm them with reading the whole thing. Another chunk of text that allows them to identify maybe what grandma might have been feeling, because I know when my grandma makes dinner with me, she feels good. She feels like this is a memory that she'll forever have. And start there with that text. if you have students who are not struggling readers and you can extend this and differentiate, providing enrichment of some sort, that's where you can pull different texts that they may have not been exposed to. So your level readers, we have the beyond level, those are definitely a go-to resource for all levels, really. But you can use your level readers. We also recommend if you have maybe a genre that is similar to the one that we are teaching the benchmark with, pull one of your own stories from your library. Maybe now, since you guys are talking about snowmen, it would be neat to pull in a story. I know the book Snowmen at Night? Okay, so you guys are talking about character perspectives. Okay, there are multiple snowmen in this story. There are multiple characters in this story. Snowmen at Night, it's relatable to what you are writing about currently, and it's the holidays. Bring in something fun. Because in a small group and you have that differentiated opportunity, you're still following the rules if you're using the benchmark to do so. Okay, you're not replacing whole group instruction, but you're pulling in a resource that will really target that benchmark. Did that answer your question? Yes. Awesome. You're welcome. Yes. Did you have a question? Okay. All right. Any other questions? I'm going to go back to our agenda. All right. So I talked about the types of questioning that should take place. So using those do's to develop questions. Remember, your TE does a great job with scaffolding and building background knowledge, but it doesn't always ask the right questions to hit the benchmark. So just know that the questioning that you are creating, and even if it's on a Post-it that you stick in your TE, develop questions as a team that really hit that benchmark. Explain the speaker's perspective and so forth. Also, the activity. There are pages in the Reading Rating Companion that will hit that Spotlight benchmark. But if you need another form of assessment or an activity, we have our Stage 2 formatives. They're very short. They're usually 3 or 4 questions. That will hit the benchmark. But also, again, if you wanted to pull a resource like Snowmen at Night, tie it with the benchmark you're teaching, you can come up with a little activity that involves character perspective using a holiday story. Okay, just making sure that you hit all of those tasks that are required within that benchmark. And finally, your next steps. Now, how much time do I have?
About 15 minutes.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so I have included on the agenda an enhancement that we have done for our planning slides. And also the test specs that we have released just recently. I want to go through them.
Everybody, so you should have those test specs.
Oh, good, perfect. Now, let's start with test specs, but I do want to point out that these are still in draft form. That means it's not the be-all, tell-all, and it could change. Okay. With our test specs, we have now incorporated these into our planning slides, and just to get a feel of the room. Who uses the planning slides that we've linked to our IG to assist with planning?
Are those like the PLC note ones?
No, they're not.
Because I've tried to open every link on the
They're
IG.
underneath
I have
the
opened
PLC
every
notes.
link on the IG
Okay.
to grab information.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
like supposed to be happening,
Yeah.
and I read them, so I'm not sure which is which.
You know what?
but,
I'll
like,
pull it up and
I
then
will click on all of them.
yeah, and I
star them so they're easy to get to in my Google. Drive.
perfect. And you know what? When I pull them up, you guys are like, oh yeah, we definitely use these. Because and really they're just those question stems that go along with the exemplar. But before we get there, the test specs are available, but I kind of want to talk to you about how to work through them, because if you've never seen a test spec document, it might be overwhelming, okay? But also they are handy when it comes to planning benchmarks. So I am going to go down all the way to, what were we working on? Were we on 1.3?
Yes.
Okay. So let's go down to 1.3. 1.2. Okay. So perspective and point of view, this is where the 3rd grade benchmark starts. Now with test specs, what they do is they really just talk about the benchmark, they clarify it, they talk about the different types of questions that could be asked on state testing for this particular benchmark. They talk about the text types They talk about what's included in the assessment and what's not included in the assessment. But the most valuable part of the test spec, and I have added these to the grade 3 planning slides, is this part right here where it talks about the task demand. In my opinion, this is really the most important part of all the test spec pages because I know what is required of students on the state assessment. Even though we haven't really seen the state assessment, we don't know what it's going to look like in the spring. We do know now, though, what a multiple choice question will require students to do. We also know what maybe a table match or a short answer response will look like, okay? Now, I don't expect anyone to jump into test specs until you've really talked to maybe administration or your coaches about it. But your coaches, we just shared what the test specs are and really how to use them in your planning. So before I overwhelm you with that information, get with your coach. They will walk you through that. One good thing, the exemplars that we build, we have to keep in mind the test specs, okay? So the questions that we develop, we have to make sure that the demand is met in the question, okay? So with that said, I'm gonna go to a planning slide. And let me go back here. Now, the enhancements start quarter 3 because now we were given the permission to share test specs, so we have started this for quarter 3. So the IG planning slides I'm going to bring up will go with IG 9, which is unit 3, text set 1. So do these look a little bit more familiar when you see this?
I think we all
Yes.
use them
Okay.
somehow, but we're just not using them probably the way we should be.
Okay, so maybe another little takeaway, I can share like what the most beneficial parts of these are. Again, next year, we might be more comfortable using all of it, but being that it's the first year, there's so much stuff and it's overwhelming. So there's no way we can do it all correctly. So with that said, the first slide that goes in your planning slide is really just that benchmark definition, okay? The considerations, this is coming from a teacher brain, okay? So when we sit down and write the considerations, it's really how the teacher brain thinks and the things that should be mentioned when teaching this particular standard. And I know we're moving on to 2.2, which is central idea, but the considerations is a really important part. If you are new to teaching and you've never taught central idea before, I would go to the considerations first and foremost, okay? Next, the question stems. If you can write these questions and use them throughout your shared and your anchor, do it, because the TE does not do it for you, okay? Finally, this is the enhancement that I was talking about. We took the test specs and we have added a slide that allows you to see that task demand, okay, but also the types of questions that will be asked. Right now, the only thing I want you to think about is the task demand because they go with the do's. The do's that I just showed you on the IG, they go along with this task demand. See how it says identify the central idea and explain how relevant details support that idea in the text? If that's what is expected of students to do, just like the do's in the IG, then make this your biggest takeaway for now. All of this other stuff will make sense when you sit down with your coach. We talked about this at Leading and Learning last night, and we will tonight as well. So your Leading and Learning representatives in grade 3, 4, and 5, they will hear about this, and they will be able to articulate the information on this enhancement, but also in the test specs, okay? With this being a year of all new, I mean, you have to think curriculum, best standards, new IGs, new texts. I mean, everything is new, a new test. It's a lot. So as a teacher, the most important thing you can do is to ensure you are teaching the benchmark correctly and providing that opportunity to hit the benchmark entirely with that rigor in mind. And other than that, that is all I have for you today. All right, so before we leave today, do you guys have any questions or an idea of how I can help implement those do's into your planning. Or even think on it, sleep on it, and, we can plan together the next time around.
So Lauren will be coming back several times. She's gonna come back and plan with us. She's also gonna come back and visit our classrooms to help coach and support us. So she's not evaluative, she's here to just truly support our fourth and fifth, and she'll pop into some of our K through 2 classes also.
Absolutely. And really just to piggyback on that and talking perspective, I don't want you to be afraid to tell me how you feel about what you're doing. If you think of things a little bit differently than the way I explain it, that's okay. Because you are the teacher in your classroom, you know your students. My goal is just to provide you with these little strategies to, one, make the things that are going on in your classroom a little bit better than you thought they could be, okay? And really, it's just to help with all this new, all right?